Okay, so ready to dig in? We're doing a deep dive on something that's honestly way more interesting than it sounds at first, sensory eating, specifically with autism.
It's one of those things, right? Like, we all know someone who's a picky eater, but this article, Understanding Sensory Eating in Autism, from Cheap ABA, it really gets into how different that experience can be for folks on the spectrum.
Yeah, it's like we think about the senses like taste, touch, smell. Those are the obvious ones.
Right.
But even just the way food looks, the article makes a big deal about that. And I got to say, I get it. Ever opened like leftovers or something and it just looks off, even if it's fine, and suddenly you're not hungry anymore?
Oh, totally. And for a lot of autistic people, it's not just, oh, that looks a little weird. It's like way more intense. Like those senses are kind of cranked up to 11, you know?
Makes sense. And the article threw out a stat, something like 70 to 90% of autistic individuals, they've got these sensory processing things going on. And a lot of them, it affects how they eat. That's huge.
And that's where it becomes a bigger deal than just, oh, eat your vegetables.
Right.
Because imagine, for some people, certain textures, it's not just they don't like it, it might trigger a gag reflex. That's got to be tough to get a balanced diet when your body's practically fighting you.
No kid. So we're not talking about picky eating, really. We're talking about like a totally different way of experiencing the world through your senses. And when you apply that to something as basic as food,
Exactly. And then people get labeled as difficult or parents get frustrated. But it's like, if you don't understand why it's happening,
you can't really solve it. Right.
right, it's about meeting that person where they are. And thankfully, the article had some good advice on that. What really stuck out to you?
Well, the environment thing, they made a big deal about how important it is to have like a calm mealtime. And again, that makes sense. Think about if you're trying to eat with like bright lights, loud noises, everything's chaotic.
Oh, sensory overload for sure.
Yeah, it'd be like trying to enjoy a nice dinner at a rock concert, you know?
Exactly. And for someone who's already sensitive to that stuff,
Yeah.
that's every meal. So just calming things down, that's got to help.
Right. And it's not just like the overall vibe, right?
Yeah.
The article talked about how you introduce new foods too. Like instead of a whole pile of something a kid's never seen before, you put a little bit next to something familiar.
Oh, yeah. Makes a big difference. It's like you wouldn't shove someone into the deep end of a pool if they've never swam before, right? You start them off slow.
Exactly. And that whole thing about encouraging sensory exploration, like letting kids touch and smell and really look at their food without having to eat it right away.
I love that part. It's funny because usually it's don't play with your food. But for some kids, that's how they figure it out,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's got to be okay to touch first.
It's a whole different message for sure. Instead of finish your plate, it's more like explore your plate.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's, like, actual science behind it. Think about exposure therapy, for phobias and stuff. You gradually get used to something you're scared of. This is kind of the food version of that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we've got the calm environment, going slow with new foods, letting them get hands-on. What else stuck out to you from the article?
They talked a lot about respecting preferences, like not getting into those power struggles at mealtime.
Mm.
Because if you force a kid to eat something they really can't stand, it just builds bad memories around food.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, though. Like, as a society, there's so much pressure around food. Clean your plate, don't waste.
Yeah, all that stuff.
You'll like it if you try it.
Right. But imagine how that lands for a kid who's, like, legitimately overwhelmed by the smell or the texture. It'd be like telling someone with arachnophobia to just hold a spider, it's fine.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that puts it in perspective. We really don't think about how different those experiences can be.
And that's why this is so important. It's about educating people, building empathy. So instead of getting frustrated, you can actually help.
Right. It's not what's wrong with this kid. It's what's going on and how can we figure this out together?
Exactly. And sometimes that means bringing in a professional, right?
Yeah.
The article mentioned that if it's getting really bad, like a kid's not growing right, or meal times are just constant battles.
That's when it's beyond just like regular picky eating.
Right. A dietitian or a therapist who gets those sensory things, they can be amazing. They've got way more tools in the toolbox than we do.
So it's not even just about the food itself. It's the emotional side, the social side, all of that.
100%.
Yeah.
Because for some people, that's what it comes down to. It's not just, oh, I don't like that. It's their whole world. Finding the right support is huge.
It's like it's not on the person with the sensory issues to just like get over it. It's got to be a team effort. It's funny. We always talk about getting kids to eat new things. Like, it's this universal struggle, right?
Right.
But this whole sensory thing, it really makes you realize it's not that simple.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's not just about being stubborn or,
Hmm.
it's a whole different thing going on in their head.
Totally. This whole deep dive, it's got me thinking about my own quirks, you know? Like, I cannot stand the smell of cucumbers.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Makes me gag. Never even thought about it much, just figured I didn't like them.
It's funny how that works, right? We all have those things, like
Yeah.
certain smells or whatever.
Totally. But what might just be like, ooh, I don't like that for one person, for someone else, it's a whole deal.
Exactly. So when you say just try it or it's good for you, I mean, it's coming from a good place, but
That's the point.
yeah, totally. It's about figuring out how to support those differences, not just pretend they don't exist.
Oh, yeah.
And celebrating the small wins too, right?
Oh, yeah. If a kid can even handle having a new food on their plate without, like, freaking out.
That's huge progress.
Right.
Doesn't happen overnight.
So, as we're wrapping this up, what's, like, the one thing you hope people take away from this whole sensory eating thing?
I think it's just about being more aware, not even just with autism, but everyone, right? Like, how much do you pay attention to how your senses play into what you enjoy eating?
Not much, to be honest.
Right. But do you like crunchy stuff? Do certain smells make you hungry?
Oh, yeah. Or the opposite. Like, when people eat certain things, the sound just, ugh.
Exactly. We all have that stuff. And being a little more tuned into our own senses, I think it makes it easier to get where other people are coming from.
Makes sense. It's like there's no right way to experience food. Everyone's different.
Exactly.
I like that. Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive on sensory eating. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, folks, maybe pay a little more attention to those taste buds. What are they trying to tell you?
There you go.